Hello and thank you for joining us. You're listening to a We Do Talk with David Jaques. Today's subject is accountability in the workplace. If you read the memoirs and writings of many business leaders, there'll often be stories about putting in place strategies, goals, targets for the company, and how they're implemented and monitored. It sounds pretty straightforward, but it actually takes a lot more work to put it into practice, especially with smaller companies, and this is something which is often overlooked at the startup level. So today I have an expert in the field that's joining me, and it's my pleasure to introduce Suzy Burke, who is joining me today from Connecticut. So Suzy, very good morning to you. Welcome to We Do, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, David. It's great to be with you.
Suzy is the co-founder of a company called Accountability Inc. that provides a coaching service in the implementation of accountability. But Suzy, you have a very diverse career background. You were an executive at a major corporation for many years. You've been a middle and high school teacher. You've been an entrepreneur. You've run your own consulting practice. So you've done a lot of things. So my question to you is, why is this important, and why is this something at this point in your life that you really feel is important for you to do?
I feel like so many small businesses are struggling, particularly startups. 90% of startups fail. The average life of a small to mid-sized business is only 8.5 years. Even the Fortune 500 are failing at an astonishing rate. And, I want an America that has a strong business foundation, people feeling excited and inspired by the work that they do. And without accountability, that's just not possible. 85% of leaders don't define clear expectations for their people. 82% of leaders say that they don't know how to hold people accountable. 91% of their employees agree, which is a very scary number. And we're in the midst of a crisis of employee engagement. Gallup reported last year that only 34% of employees are engaged in the work that they do every day, and the rest are just along for the ride. And I think that's a hard number that illustrates the quiet quitting revolution that we're in the midst of. And if people aren't feeling inspired, aren't feeling accountable, the businesses can't succeed. If people are just going through the motions, not knowing what they're supposed to be doing, it's just a horrible situation. And interestingly, I've thought about, I know that you care a lot about mental health. And I read an article online this morning that CEO of Rivian has a crazy schedule. In 1 week, he flies from San Francisco to LA, out to Illinois, and back again. And he said the reason that it's fine for him to do that is he's excited by everything that he's doing. And I firmly believe that when you're excited and inspired, that there's no burnout because you love what you're doing. And that's not possible if there's not a culture of accountability, where it doesn't matter what you do. I worked actually once for a company, and my boss, the CEO, came to see me after about a month, and she said, "So what do you think?" I said, "I've never worked for a company where results didn't matter." She's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, results don't matter here." So she came back the next month and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Same thing." When results don't matter, when what you do doesn't have an impact, it doesn't make a difference, it's very hard to be excited and inspired by it. So I think for all of those reasons, accountability is, Rhett and I believe that accountability is really a secret sauce, an essential for organizations to survive these days. There are so many distractions possible. The average business person gets 140 emails every day. They write 40 of their own. They have to check their Slack channel, their WhatsApp feed, text messages, phone calls. It's impossible to stay focused on the things that really matter without a huge amount of determination. I think accountability enables that.
And would you say that there's many terms, there's acronyms, there's words, there's buzzwords out there, and it's really important to know what people are meaning and what they understand by them. And when I hear what you're saying about accountability, I think is it really a case of engagement, is getting employees engaged in what they're doing, getting people excited about what they're doing. That seems to me to be really what is lacking in a lot of corporate culture today.
I agree. And it's not enough to be engaged. You've got to be engaged for a purpose. Because organizations and people who feel a passion for their purpose really have a much better work experience. You can be engaged in something that seems sort of stupid, right? That's not very inspiring. But to be focused and engaged on something where you feel like you're making a difference in the world is wonderful. I read an article about a woman who works, she works making suits for motorcycle riders. And in her mind, she's saving lives because she knows that if riders are wearing her suits, if they have an accident, they're more likely to survive it. So that kind of purpose, that kind of focus, I think really inspires employee engagement. And when you believe that what you're doing is going to save a life, it's much easier to be accountable. Do what you're supposed to be doing every day, when you're supposed to be doing it to the right level of quality, and owning it when you don't, when you make a mistake.
I think that level of humility is really important. Would you say that if everyone can be forgiven for getting something wrong, everyone needs a second chance. I'm a great believer in that. And particularly in business, you can have the best plan, the best strategy that might look good today, but for some reason in 3 months from now, it's not viable anymore. And it could be because you do something wrong yourself. It could be because the market changes, something happens in unforeseen circumstances, and it's okay to say, that didn't work, we need to rethink it.
Absolutely. And I, use the word humility. It's certainly a requirement. And I talk about courage. It takes courage to say, you know what, I told you I was going to do this and I didn't get it done. And I'm sorry, and I'll get it done by whenever. Or to say, you know what, I screwed up. I thought I had understood the data correctly. On a second look, I realized that I've missed the mark. We're going to have to start over. But the sooner that people, in an environment where admitting failure, admitting mistakes is celebrated, is an opportunity to learn rather than punished, it's a much healthier work climate and enables problems to be solved more quickly.
A very good friend and mentor of mine, somebody who was my manager when I worked for Barclays Bank in London several decades ago now, once said to me something that I thought was very insightful and I forget the circumstances quite honestly, but something like this had happened where I think I'd said, I did this wrong. I admitted some wrongdoing or whatever. And what she said to me was, honesty is very disarming. That if you go to someone and say, look, I'm sorry, I messed up, I did this wrong, I didn't deliver whatever, they're much more likely to either forgive you or work with you to rectify the situation rather than a feeble excuse that covers up the truth of, right, I didn't actually do this.
Right.
I mean, but so few people do that. We tend to have the natural human tendency to make some kind of an excuse for not doing something. But if we just own up to it and say, I didn't do it, I will get it done. It's pretty simple, right?
You're exactly right. And I think, some leaders are afraid to admit mistakes. They think that they've got to be bulletproof. But the reality and the data support this. When someone is vulnerable, their stock goes up because people know it takes courage to say, I messed up. And when someone can be that honest and forthcoming, they're more trustworthy. They're seen as better leaders. So it's not something to hide from. Certainly don't want to screw up every day. But when a leader can say, I made an honest mistake and this is what I'm going to do to fix it, they're much more trusted, they're believable, people are more willing to follow them.
Suzy, you've seen many examples in small and large businesses yourself during your working career. And I referred a little bit to some of the things that you've done, but would you give us a bit of background on yourself and your journey to get to where you are today?
I had a really interesting and diverse career. I spent 7 years in the classroom. Then I went back to Columbia and I got a PhD in social and organizational psychology. My first business role was at Xerox Corporation in HR, where I redesigned the performance appraisal system for 100,000 people, which was a pretty exciting gig for a newbie. From there, I went to customer service, where I was responsible for the implementation of empowered teams worldwide. And that was really exciting because I traveled around the world helping leaders and managers figure out how to give the people doing the work more ownership in the work processes they used, the tools they used, how they held themselves accountable, and of course, they were accountable for the results. From there, I had a really interesting job. Xerox reorganized a lot. And in one of the reorgs, they took the 13 corporate EVPs, who were the division presidents, and pulled them together to act as a chief operating officer. It was failing. They had a fancy consultant from New York City trying to help them. And one day I got a call from the chairman of the corporation. He said, you must know something about teams. Can you come and help them get themselves organized? So I spent 3 days a month with these guys, all guys except for one woman. And I was their team coach, but I was also their individual coaches. And it was wonderful to see how, with just a little bit of adjustment, they became a high-performing team. From there, I went to work as a quality officer for the biggest division. But I decided I had always done staff work, which, I did quite well, but I wanted to have a P&L. So I asked my boss if I could, actually I asked Ann Mulcahy, who was then the CHRO, if I could get a line assignment. And because so many people knew me, I was given the opportunity to run one of the outsourcing businesses in New York City. Xerox had 50 of those at the time. I think because I had only done staff work, they thought I might screw it up. So they gave me number 50 out of 50, the worst in the country. In 18 months, using the system of accountability that we use with our clients, we went from worst to first. It was as simple as every Monday morning, my team sat down. We all had a shared Excel table, and people talked about what they were responsible for. Green, yellow, or red. Green, on track. Yellow, off track, but I know how to get there. And red, I need help. It taught me who was in the right job, who could take on more, who was in the wrong job, and all sorts of things. So it was a really powerful system that took us from worst to first in 18 months. From there, I decided I wanted to see if I could apply everything I had learned to my own business. So I've started several companies. Probably the fastest ride was I started a fashion jewelry business with a Brazilian designer. We had a store in Soho, which is a design center for New York City. And the thrill of it all was to be backstage at Lincoln Center for Fashion Week with 30 of Sobral's looks around these models' necks and arms and so on, watching them go out on the catwalk. But I decided after all of that to get back to my roots as a social and organizational psychologist. I've been consulting and coaching work in this accountability business with Red Power for the last 7 years. So I feel like I'm back where I belong at this point in my life. I love it. I love it. I'm able to take everything I've learned and put it into this business.
I think one of the things that comes out of it, and I feel very much the same about looking back on my career, that I can pull out of it the pieces that I really enjoy, the pieces that are really important, and leave behind the ones that I've outgrown, because I'm a big believer in outgrowing your environment, that if you're in a job for too long and if you're doing the one thing for too long, it will become stale. Now, there are some people that actually enjoy that type of lifestyle and they enjoy that level of stability and predictability, and great for them if that's something that they're happy in. But that's, to me, is the main thing is happiness in the workplace. That feeling of getting up in the morning and being excited to do whatever it is, whether it is that more traditional going into the office or getting up and doing your own thing and following up on the emails and leads and whatever it is that you're doing. So yeah, happiness and engagement. So Suzy, I'd like to ask you a little more about Accountability Inc. And you are a co-founder with your partner, Red Power. And how long have you known Rhett, and what led to the two of you working together and forming a company together?
Rhett and I are both Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches. Marshall Goldsmith is clearly recognized as the #1 leadership thinker and coach in the world. He coaches people like the president of the World Bank, president of major corporations, country leaders, Marine and Army generals, and so on. And when he turned 70, he decided he wanted to take everything he had learned and give it to 15 people for free, with the only expectation that when they got to be 70, they'd pay it forward and share everything that they had learned for free. So he put a little blurb on LinkedIn, thinking he might get 50 or 60 applications. He got 18,000 people who wanted to be an MG100 coach. So he chose 100 and started that cohort. But every year he adds more. So Rhett and I are both MG100 coaches. And Marshall, before the pandemic, was getting everyone together once a year for just learning and fellowship. And I met Rhett in March of 2019 out in San Diego for a 3-day MG100 get together. And we had spent some time with 2 other MG100 coaches as well. And we found an opportunity that the 4 of us could work together. So we did a multi-million-dollar project with a hospital in North Carolina for a year that ended end of 2020. Rhett and I we liked each other. We have complementary skills. We work well together. And we both care about accountability. We both had similar experiences of having accountability enable us to really succeed and thrive in the business world. So we just partnered our resources and we're off and running.
Isn't it amazing how sometimes some relationships just click like that and they're
Absolutely.
a natural? Yeah. So with Accountability Inc., so when you are engaged by a client, and I understand that you work more with companies on the startup end rather than larger mature corporations, and I'm sure there's room for your product in all ends of the spectrum. What is your general approach? How will you start to work with a client, and what's the first few questions that you ask them, and what do you try to find out to know how you can help them progress?
Well, I think that overall, the process starts with really deep listening, certainly to whoever's hiring us, but often the CEO. Often, we will often interview members of the executive team to get everyone's perspective on what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and then to drill down in particular problems that have led someone to contact us. But by listening deeply and fully, we kind of synthesize all that information and go back to the team and say, based on everything we heard, this is what we think might be the best approach for you to work with us. And then we go from there. Often, I believe that action creates understanding. So we start, and once we get going, we determine how we have to adjust the engagement to reflect the changing business needs. It's all about listening from our hearts and from our souls.
Now, in the world of entrepreneurism, and particularly here in Silicon Valley, I've heard it said many times among particularly venture capital investors of, we want to invest in something which is either a vitamin pill or a painkiller, meaning you're improving something and you're preventing something bad from happening, or you're curing a problem. So I would imagine that when you go into companies, you probably see both sides of that. You see companies that are in deep trouble that just need a lot of help to dig themselves out, and some that are actually pretty well positioned, but they just want to be able to do better. What's your perspective on that, and what are your general findings in that regard?
In the old days, people who are failing were the ones who got executive coaches. These days, the people who get executive coaches are the high potentials, the high performers who want to go from great to really great. And Rhett and I feel the same way about Accountability Inc. Once a company is circling the drain, it's really hard to pull it back. And it's hard to get people's attention because they're in survival mode, hard to get anyone's attention to having the discipline and the courage and the humility to work in an accountability system. So we find it best, and we like to work with funded startups where there's often too much going on for anyone to keep control of. So they need a system that will help them really understand what the priorities are and ensure that everyone on the team is working only on the most important things. So I'm a fan of the vitamin pill myself.
Yeah. Well, I put it in the same category as in medicine. Our doctors prefer us to go to see them when we're feeling well. And you go for that regular checkup and you have all your blood work done and everything. And if there is the potential for a problem that they uncover early, then maybe preventive measures can be taken to be able to deal with that, rather than waiting until you're seriously ill and then it's too late, or in worst
Absolutely.
case, it's too late, or it's something that then needs fairly radical action.
Right.
So we're really looking at the same thing, is what you're saying, I think.
Right. Exactly.
Suzy, how do you keep yourself accountable? What is accountability for yourself?
Well, Rhett and I together have an accountability system. We have a tracker. We each have our own priorities that we're responsible for delivering. And we talk on Monday. We've got a schedule called Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to talk about how we're progressing, to share where we're struggling, where we might need help, where we need to collaborate on things. We talk about existing client engagements as well as prospective new clients. But really, the tracker keeps us accountable for the things that each of us has committed to do for the business. And by talking 3 times a week, there's no place to hide, right?
That's a great way of doing it, and I'm sure you have other methods for your personal life for keeping yourself accountability for your own goals as well.
Well, Marshall Goldsmith has this thing called daily questions, and I use them as an affirmation in the morning. Today, I will do my best to. And then in the evening, I have an accountability partner. We talk on the phone, and I say, today, did I do my best to, whatever it might be, walk 10,000 steps, eat only healthy food, spend 3 hours working on the book? And I tell her how I did. And it's an interesting way to make sure that I work on only the things that matter most to me. Because again, there are 1,000 shiny new things. I've got lots of friends, lots of invitations, lots of things that are important that I would love to do, but are not on my critical path right now.
And would you agree that sharing something with someone else is a great method of being accountable to yourself? That I'm a great believer in four words, four very important words: you are not alone. And what I mean by that is that it's so easy to feel isolated, whether it's in business, whether it's you're a CEO, which is a very lonely place to be because
Lonely.
there's very few people that you can go to, or you're simply an individual that's trying to lose weight, trying to get healthy or whatever. If you share that with somebody else and you tell somebody else about what your goals are and what you're trying to do and do a regular check-in with them, you're not alone.
And there's lots of data to support that. In fact, Marshall, who writes about all this stuff, right? He's the guy. He pays someone to call him every night at 10 o'clock so that he can answer his daily questions with that person. And he has found that that makes all the difference between sticking to the priorities and getting distracted.
Now, Suzy, one thing I'd like to ask you, you mentioned earlier on that mental health and mental well-being is something that's very important to me, which it is. I'm a big advocate for telling stories, taking away the stigma. And you have a PhD in social and organizational psychology, so I'm sure you've seen a lot of situations in the workplace where morale is bad, could lead to mental health. And mental health is very much an individual thing. It's not something which is corporate-wide by any means, because everybody reacts differently to different things. But in 2022, are companies doing enough to support the mental health and mental well-being of their employees? I think a little bit of work is starting to get done, but I'm not seeing a big revolution in this way. What's your perspective
Yeah,
on
I
that?
would agree with you 100%. And I think the work that they are doing is misguided. Companies think that by putting in a better gym or giving free coffee, those kinds of things that would make a difference in people's mental health, and they don't. What matters is having a sense of purpose, having a boss that values you, that wants your opinion, that takes time to teach you and coach you. And those kinds of things, they're hard. It's easier to just put in a new cafeteria, right? But what really matters is the quality of the boss-employee relationships and the sense of doing work that matters. 70% of the reason that someone would quit a company is because of the bad relationship with the boss. And I think one of the great things about Xerox is they had amazing leadership training at all levels. When I became a manager, the first thing they did was send me away for a week of school at Leesburg, Virginia, which was the Xerox Education Center, which is worldwide. And then I went back again and again and again, not because I was flunking, but because there were always more things to learn. And I think too many managers just get thrown into the job. They have no idea what to do. And when a manager is pushing, driving, allowing rifts to bubble up and grow, all that creates really tension for employees and leads to burnout and loneliness and too often suicide. I mean, there's a pandemic of suicide in America right now, particularly young people.
Sadly, that is the case, and the more we can do to prevent that situation. And once again, my belief is talking about it, and that there is no shame in being vulnerable and admitting and talking about our feelings. And particularly one demographic which is underserved in this regard is adult men, because women are much better at talking to each other and getting support from each other.
Yes, they are.
Men don't do that as well. We still have a lot to learn. So anything that you as a woman can teach us guys and the rest of the female population, I think men should be open to being vulnerable and talking about how they feel, because it will only make us better people.
When we were in Canada, we had our mainland friends over, a couple, and I was sitting with Maggie, and Ed was sitting with Kit. And Ed and Kit were talking about the solar system. We've got a solar system, solar panels and batteries and so on. Maggie and I were talking about our feelings, right? How the kids were doing, how we were feeling about being there, and so on. It was just a very different kind of conversation. And talk about sports.
Yeah.
Women talk about relationships.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think we're making moves in the right direction. And my kids are 22 and 19, and I hear the sort of things that they're speaking about way more openly, way differently.
Oh, yes.
Much more inclusion, a lot of openness, much less stigma. So in that generation, things are moving more so than they are in people of our age, and that's very heartening to see that. But
Absolutely.
still a lot of work that's really left to be done. So Suzy, just coming back a little bit to the workplace, and we do hear these terms like quietly quitting, great resignation. A lot of people are shifting from conventional corporate employment, where you are an employee, into doing their own thing. And as you know what we do, we support freelancers, independent workers, performers, anybody that's really working on their own, and to help build that sense of community that they don't have if they're working alone. But I think a lot of people out there may have a great idea, but it's pretty scary to go out on your own and lose that safety net of a corporate job. What advice would you give somebody that has a fantastic idea that says, I'm putting in all these hours and working for a boss I don't like, or somewhere I'm really not engaged. I could do much better by myself, but I'm scared to do it. How would you advise them to proceed?
Well, I think the first thing when you want to start your own business, first, before anything else, is make sure that there's a market for what you're selling. It's very easy to think that my great idea is something that everyone else is going to love. But it's really important to do pilot tests and try things out, and talk to your neighbors and go to the library and have a prototype or a sample, or a sample of your workshop, and see how people respond. Because it's easy to think that everyone's going to love my big idea, but it's often not the case. So that's, to me, the first thing. The second thing is be prepared to work 24/7. When I was working at Xerox, when I was running the operation, I had a big job. I'd be in the office by 6:30. I didn't leave typically until 9 at night. But on the weekends, I was off. When you have your own business, it's with me 7 days a week. I fall asleep thinking about clients. I wake up thinking about clients. And it takes a real disciplined effort to say, you know what, I'm going to take this time, or these days, my husband and I are going to go away this weekend. I'm going to take time to have a life, because if you don't, it can be all consuming. And then you burn out, even if you love it.
Yeah. And the same is true in terms of the difference in environment. If you do go to work from a large corporation into a startup, and I had that experience many years ago now, when I left my job with a bank, a very successful bank, and went to work for PayPal, which was a complete startup. We were a dozen guys working in a room about the size of the room I'm in right now. And one of the things I realized is that if you do work for a large corporation, there are several things you take for granted that you never really think about. Things like the coffee was always made in the morning when I arrived at work. Janitorial service just kind of magically happens. You don't ever have to think about it. But when you go to work for a small company with a low budget, on the second week I was there, I think, I took the garbage out because we had no janitorial service. Nobody else was there to do it.
Right.
And there was a discarded food container. So I thought, okay, I guess this is part of my job now. No big deal, but it's a realization that there are so many things that you sometimes take for granted.
Exactly. A boss of mine from Xerox was fired for good cause. And one day he stopped by my house, and he told me he's kind of an arrogant guy. And he was on his way to the copy center and then to the post office to mail a proposal. And I thought to myself, Bob would have never, ever gone near the copy machine. So he was finding that he had to do everything. He didn't have a secretary anymore. He was a secretary.
Yeah, and we're far more versatile than sometimes we give ourselves credit for.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Suzy, this has been great to hear your perspective and hear a little bit more about your company. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the future of work, the future of the world? Any thoughts you'd like to share with us today?
I believe, and I just wrote a chapter for a book that Marshall's going to publish. I believe empowerment is really essential to the future of work and employee engagement and purpose. It's so disheartening to have a good brain and have your boss treat you as if you only have a pair of hands. And even at the most basic level, if you invite people to think about how they might do their job more effectively, more efficiently, how they might have a better impact on clients, they love the fact that you think they've got a brain. And I think smart leaders really make their employees feel valued, feel listened to. I'm working with a client right now, and I did a bunch of focus groups with them. And they're really smart people, and they say, you know what, no matter what idea I have, the boss says, nope, 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 that's not how we do it here. And it's really discouraging and disheartening. So I believe that if organizations can use the whole person that's standing in front of them rather than simply telling, leaning over their shoulders and telling them exactly when to pick up the pencil, I think that can be a game changer because it leads to engagement. Engagement leads to profitability.
Yeah. Well, Suzy, this has been wonderful to hear your perspective and to hear your thoughts and to hear your story and everything about what you're doing. And I'd like to just say big thanks to you for being here today and for joining me.
Great to talk with you, David, as always.
Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to leave your comments below, please do so. And please subscribe to our channel. And I'll see you next time. We upload a We Do Talk every week. So if you enjoyed this one, please subscribe and leave your comments below.